Who replaces the old policeman when the order of things begins to fall apart? This is Dr. Gary Kellner, and I would like to welcome you to this edition of Fair Game. On August the 7th, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Pakistan inked an agreement for the three countries to enter into a mutual defense pact, which is meant to discourage Iran in its regional ambitions. In the last few days, there have been indications that Egypt also is giving serious consideration to entering into this new alliance. The Saudi story has just gotten a lot bigger as the Saudis have announced the launch of a 13-nation maritime defense alliance. These developments are being treated by serious defense analysts as potentially important because they may represent a new geopolitical alignment in the Middle East. So the question is not simply, what are the Saudis doing? It really becomes, who replaces the old policeman when the order of things begins to fall apart? After Napoleon was defeated at Waterloo, the concert of Europe met to establish a new world order. One result of that was to formalize Britain's long role in protecting maritime trade routes. That held until the end of the Second World War. The two world wars together bankrupted the British. They no longer had the resources to patrol the oceans and seas of the world to guarantee commerce. That role was abdicated by the British, and it was picked up by the United States. They were in an historic meeting between King Ibn Saud and Franklin Roosevelt in early 1945. Roosevelt had just come back from Yalta. He was on his way to the United States. He met with the king, and they talked about the new order of things in the Middle East. And the king bought into providing cheap oil for the West, and the United States would supply security for the Saudis. Now, the United States has a president who does not believe that those security arrangements are in the interest of the United States in the 21st century. Now, this is not unique to Donald J. Trump. Obama said quite clearly that the future of America was in the Pacific and not in Europe. And after long wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, the Democrats saw themselves reducing their presence in the Middle East, not continuing it. Trump is really consistent with the direction set by Obama. So here's the question. Are we watching the birth of a new alliance that in some ways will support what the U.S. has been doing for the last 80 years? Or are we watching the birth of a new order in the Middle East because these countries don't believe they can trust the old policeman anymore? Just this week, the Iranians hit a couple of UAE tankers. They were hit by drones while transiting the Strait of Hormuz. The United Arab Emirates blamed Iran. President Trump responded by saying that traffic is moving normally through the strait. Prior to the war, about 100 ships a day went through the Strait of Hormuz. That number is down to 3. Normal would mean the restoration of the situation before the war, what would sometimes be called the status quo ante bellum, for those of you who enjoy a little bit of Latin, though I suspect nobody really enjoys any Latin. But his objective was restoring the status quo. It has not been restored. And so the regional powers are asking themselves some deep questions about the U.S. role and where things need to move. Now, in addition to the problem we have with the Strait of Hormuz, you will recall that Iran's proxy in the Red Sea, the Houthis, who control quite a bit of the country of Yemen, have announced a blockade of Bab-el-Mandeb, which is the southeast opening of the Red Sea. And Hezbollah has announced that they're blockading the Suez Canal. Now, you don't have either of them with the capacity to enforce a blockade. What you do have is another test of American will, of American commitment. And every head of state in the Middle East is watching Washington closely to see whether or not the U.S. will continue to fulfill its role of maintaining order in the Middle East. A few weeks ago, I had as my guest naval historian Pete Stark, who talked about the role of sea power in history. And to condense that discussion, the role of navies is to protect the flow of commerce. It is in America's interest to maintain the flow of oil out of the Middle East and the flow of products from the West into those countries. Now, one of the problems that the U.S. has is its notorious lack of patience. Zhou Enlai was once asked the question what he thought of the French Revolution that occurred more than 150 years before the Chinese Civil War. And Zhou replied, "It's too soon to tell." The Chinese, the Iranians, take a very long view of history. They even take a different view of what it means to win. For both of them, the object is to keep the game going. For the U.S., it is to win or to lose. You're up or you're down. That view of the Middle East is bound to shipwreck on the rocks of reality. The United States is in a place right now where not only its role in the Middle East is at stake, our allies in the Pacific are also beginning to ask questions about American commitment. Just this week, the U.S. announced that it was going to dial down its joint military exercises with South Korea, while at the same time it is redeploying the carrier group led by the USS George Washington from the Western Pacific to the Middle East. And for the first time since 1945, there is no United States naval presence of any significance in the Pacific. It's often hard for folks who don't follow this every day or who have never had to muddle through the history of it to understand the linkage between these things. But what happens in the Strait of Hormuz affects the way every government in the Middle East sees us, the way they see our willingness to keep our commitments, but it links to every head of state in the Pacific as well. And so, at the end of the day, most political decisions are driven by fear. They're not driven by vision. They are not driven by hope. For the average politician, it is the fear of getting voted out. For heads of state, it may be the loss of influence of their country or being invaded by an enemy. In this case, every one of those Middle Eastern countries knows what Iran is. Every one of them know what it is capable of. And it is absolutely essential that the United States send a clear message of its commitment to support its allies and to support the flow of commerce in the Persian Gulf and throughout the world. This is Dr. Gary Kellner, and I would like to thank you for joining me today for Fair Game.